What? The code worked?
I told you I could do it.
How did you know the code?
I'm smarter than I look.
This isn't over, kid.
3:12 in the morning. The digital clock on the subterranean wall glowed a sharp red as Marco Russo hurried down the final flight of stairs. The air deep beneath his estate was freezing, but Marco was burning up. Beads of cold sweat dripped down his forehead, running over his sharp, tanned facial features and tracking lines through the dark ink tattoos that covered his entire neck. Rumors of an internal coup had been whispering through the syndicate all week, and he needed his sanctuary. He needed the vault. It was a military-grade fortress, a room protected by layers of encryption that only his own body should have been able to open. Marco rounded the stone corner, his luxury gold watch catching the dim light of the corridor. His right hand was wrapped tightly around his compact black semi-automatic pistol, pressing it defensively against his chest. His unbuttoned white dress shirt was damp with sweat under his tailored suit jacket, his jet black hair still neatly slicked back despite the panic driving him forward. He reached the end of the hall and froze. The massive steel vault door was already wide open. Pure panic flooded his chest. Marco swung around the frame, his gun raised, his eyes stretched wide and his mouth agape in absolute disbelief. He expected to find a rival assassin or a team of rogue soldiers ready to end his reign. Instead, his mind completely stalled. A little boy, a fair-skinned child around 7 years old, was sitting calmly in the massive executive chair. He wore a vibrant royal blue pullover hoodie, and a dark brown backpack was slung over his small shoulders. His thick, curly, light brown hair caught the bright glow of the security screen. The boy did not flinch when the heavy footsteps entered. He did not look up in fear. Instead, a calm, slightly amused smile touched his lips. His left hand casually pressed a key on the terminal, while his right index finger rested flat against the glowing green biometric fingerprint scanner, the very scanner that was coded to recognize only Marco Russo. The gun in Marco's hand felt suddenly heavy, an awkward and useless piece of metal against the quiet innocence of the room. He did not lower it immediately. His mind, trained for decades to perceive any intrusion as a lethal threat, fought against what his eyes were showing him. The green light from the biometric scanner painted the boy's face in soft, ghostly hues, highlighting the absolute calm in his wide eyes. The silence in the vault was deep, broken only by the steady, low hum of the massive server racks lining the concrete walls. Marco's breath hitched in his throat, a sharp contrast to the child's slow, rhythmic breathing. He swallowed hard, the sweat on his neck suddenly feeling freezing against his collar. "Who let you in here?" Marco's voice finally broke through the silence, though it lacked its usual thunderous command. It came out as a harsh, raspy whisper, vibrating off the cold steel surfaces of his ultimate hiding place. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the reinforced floor. "How did you bypass the mainframe? Nobody has the encryption algorithms for this terminal. Nobody." His gaze flicked from the child's small face down to the green glass panel, where the boy's tiny index finger remained perfectly still. The system log on the screen was supposed to deny access to anyone else, yet the interface was wide open, displaying the core directory of his entire criminal empire. The little boy did not flinch at the weapon or the imposing shadow Marco cast over the desk. Instead, His smile widened just a fraction, a look of pure, untroubled amusement that seemed completely out of place in a Mafia stronghold. He gently tapped a single key on the mechanical keyboard, a soft click that sounded incredibly loud in the enclosed space. "It did not bypass anything, Mr. Russo," the boy said, his voice remarkably steady for someone his size. He lifted his hand from the scanner, leaving a faint smudge of warmth on the glass. The mainframe didn't get tricked by a fake code. It did exactly what it was programmed to do. It recognized mine. Marco stopped dead in his tracks, just a few feet from the edge of the mahogany desk. His eyebrows furrowed deeper, his mind racing to find an explanation that made sense. "Your code?" he repeated, the words tasting strange and impossible on his tongue. "That's impossible. I personally supervise the installation of this entire security network. Only 2 sets of biometrics were ever registered into the central database. Mine and the man who spent 3 years building the architecture from scratch." He stared at the child's royal blue hoodie, his brain desperately trying to bridge the massive gap between a master engineer and the small boy sitting comfortably in his high-backed leather chair. The boy adjusted the dark brown backpack on his shoulders, leaning back against the leather cushion. "I'm Frank," he said softly, looking directly into Marco's wide, panicked eyes. "Frank Wilson. Leo Wilson was my dad." The name struck Marco like a physical blow, making him lower his pistol entirely. Leo had been his brilliant chief tech architect, the genius who had designed every digital shield protecting the Russo family before his sudden death a few months ago. Looking closely now, Marco could see the faint resemblance in the boy's thick, curly auburn hair and the quiet confidence in his gaze. He wasn't looking at an enemy hacker, but the living legacy of the only man he had ever truly trusted. Marco stood frozen, his mind spinning as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. He slowly lowered his gun completely, setting it carefully on the edge of the dark wood desk. The sight of Leo's son sitting in his ultimate fortress changed everything, but the terrifying urgency in the room had not vanished. Frank turned back toward the large terminal screen, his small fingers dancing across the keys with a confidence that mirrored his late father's brilliant mind. "Look here, Mr. Russo," Frank said, pointing a small finger at a blinking line of crimson text hidden deep within the system's central ledger. Marco leaned closer, his luxury gold watch glinting under the harsh terminal lights, as cold sweat continued to gather along his neck tattoos and unbuttoned collar. The screen was filled with complex columns of binary data, but at the very center, a stark digital timer was actively counting down. It read exactly 11 hours and 48 minutes. "My dad built these firewalls to protect you," Frank explained, his young voice taking on a serious tone that didn't match his small size. "But someone inside your family found a way around them after he passed away. They planted something called a logic bomb deep inside the financial core." Marco's chest tightened painfully as he stared at the glowing numbers. A logic bomb was a malicious piece of code designed to execute automatically when specific conditions were met. "Who did this?" Marco asked, his voice low and dangerous, his furrowed eyebrows casting deep shadows across his face. Frank did not hesitate. He hit a command key, bringing up an encrypted signature file that showed the hidden origin of the virus. "It was Silvio Falli," Frank whispered, looking directly up at the Mafia boss. "Your underboss. He has been systematically accessing the network from a secure remote terminal for the past 3 weeks." The revelation hit Marco like a physical blow, his jaw tightening as he realized his closest confidant was the one pulling the strings. Frank pointed to another section of the screen where a complex series of automated routing paths were highlighted in bright yellow. The code is set to trigger at exactly 3 p.m. today, right when your Grand Council meeting begins, Frank continued, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the terminal. The moment the clock strikes 3, the virus will completely drain the syndicate's entire untraceable treasury. Every single dollar, every piece of asset will vanish into offshore accounts. Marco felt a wave of cold fury wash over him, but Frank wasn't finished. The worst part is the trail. Silvio rewrote the digital ledger to leave a flawless path of electronic breadcrumbs. When the elders look for the thief, every single piece of evidence will point straight to you, Mr. Russo. You will take the blame for everything. The stakes were absolute. If Silvio succeeded, Marco would be branded a traitor by the entire global council, resulting in his immediate and violent termination. Marco looked down at the little boy in the royal blue hoodie, utterly amazed by his technological clarity. "Why are you here, Frank?" Marco asked softly, the anger fading into desperate curiosity. Frank adjusted his dark brown backpack and placed his small hands back on the keyboard. "Because I am the only one who can stop it," Frank said with a determined smile. "My dad left me a back door into his original code. I am here to rewrite the script and turn Silvio's trap against him before that countdown hits 0. Marco leaned heavily against the edge of the mahogany desk, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process the boy's words. The sheer scale of Silvio's betrayal was staggering, but a deeper, more immediate question still burned in his paranoid mind. He looked down at the glowing green glass of the biometric scanner, then back at Frank's small, calm face. "Even if your father wanted to give you a way in, Frank, it shouldn't be possible," Marco said, his voice dropping into a low, questioning tone. "The core system only allows access if the physical data matches my exact biometric profile, or Leo's. The security mainframe doesn't just read numbers, it analyzes actual biological markers. It is completely impossible to fake." Frank smiled softly, his fingers briefly lifting from the mechanical keys to adjust the heavy straps of his dark brown backpack. "My dad knew that better than anyone, Mr. Russo," Frank explained, his young eyes holding a strange, mature wisdom. He didn't try to trick the system with a fake profile. Before he passed away, he realized that Silvio was planning something terrible. He saw the subtle, hidden shifts in the network logs and knew Silvio was trying to isolate you. But my dad couldn't warn you directly because Silvio was constantly monitoring all his electronic communications and phone calls. The boy tapped a quick sequence of keys, pulling up an entirely new layer of the terminal's hidden architecture. The screen shifted from the financial ledgers to a complex, spinning schematic of a double helix strand, pulsing with a bright emerald light. "So he built a phantom back door," Frank continued, pointing directly to the glowing DNA graphic. "A biological master override that sits completely underneath the vault's visible operating system. He knew that if Silvio ever succeeded in locking you out or framing you, the family would need an unpatchable safety valve to regain control of the core servers." Marco watched the bright green light wash over the boy's fair skin, a cold realization settling deep in his gut. He nervously adjusted his tailored black suit jacket, his luxury gold watch catching the reflection of the spinning helix. "But why you, Frank? Why map the ultimate key of this entire multi-million-dollar empire to a young child?" "Because my dad knew that Silvio would eventually scan and catalog every single adult in your organization," Frank said, his voice dropping to a gentle whisper that echoed off the cold steel walls of the silent room. Silvio checked the biometrics of your bodyguards, your captains, and your closest associates to make sure no one could surprise him. But he completely ignored my family. He thought a little kid was completely invisible to a criminal network. My dad knew I was the only person Silvio would never suspect or monitor. So he took a genetic sample of my DNA from a routine medical swab and hard-coded my unique biological signature directly into the vault's hardware foundation. Frank placed his index finger back onto the glowing green glass, and the schematic immediately dissolved, replaced by a secure authorization screen that read, "Override accepted. Alpha sequence." It doesn't just check my fingerprint, Mr. Russo. It measures the unique electrical conductivity and cellular structure of my skin. It's mapped completely to my body. My dad told me that if anything ever happened to him, and if the countdown ever started, I had to put on my blue hoodie, come straight to this estate, and use my hand to save the man who kept us alive. The heavy silence that followed Frank's words seemed to press down on Marco's shoulders, but the cold weight of panic was gone, replaced by a strange, sharp ache behind his ribs. Marco's tough, unyielding exterior, the fearsome mask he had worn for decades to keep rivals at bay and soldiers in line, finally cracked. He looked at the young boy sitting in the oversized leather chair, and the terrifying Mafia boss suddenly felt entirely exposed. His grip on the edge of the mahogany desk loosened, and he let out a long, ragged breath that trembled slightly in the chilly vault air. His mind raced backward to a dark, rainy night a few months ago when he received the devastating news of Leo's sudden death. The official report had claimed it was a tragic accident, but Marco had always felt a lingering, uneasy suspicion deep in his gut. Leo had been more than just a brilliant employee. He had been a true friend in a dark world where friends were non-existent. Shortly after the funeral, Marco discovered that Leo's family was facing financial ruin due to the high costs of Frank's specialized neurological medical treatments. In the syndicate, showing any form of sympathy was considered a fatal vulnerability that could get a man killed, so Marco had to act in total secrecy. Without telling a single soul, especially not Silvio Valli or the other ambitious captains, Marco had instructed his private offshore accountant to create an untraceable anonymous trust fund. He quietly funneled millions of dollars from his personal accounts into it, ensuring that every medical bill from the specialized children's hospital was paid in full, automatically. He had never intended for anyone to find out, believing that the deed would remain buried forever in the digital shadows of his empire. He had simply wanted to protect the innocent child of the man who had spent his life building the digital fortress that kept the Russo family safe. Marco looked down at the floor, unable to maintain eye contact with the boy, as the memories washed over him. The luxury gold watch on his wrist ticked quietly, marking the seconds in the subterranean room. When he finally lifted his gaze, he found Frank looking straight up at him, the bright green glow of the terminal reflecting in his wide, steady eyes. The boy's expression was no longer just amused. It was filled with an ancient, profound understanding that seemed far too heavy for a 7-year-old child to carry. "I know it was you who saved us, Mr. Marco," Frank said, his soft voice breaking the silence with absolute certainty. He pulled slightly at the cuffs of his royal blue pullover hoodie, his small face illuminated by the screen. "My mom found the hidden routing numbers on the hospital receipts last month. She sat at the kitchen table and cried, but they were happy tears. She told me everything. She said that when the fortress is burning, you protect the architect. That is why I am here tonight. You kept my heart beating, so now I am going to make sure your empire doesn't fall apart. Marco felt something shift deep inside his chest, a sensation he had never experienced in his life. In his violent world, people only served him out of fear or for a paycheck. No one had ever risked their safety simply to return a kindness. The little boy in front of him had just dismantled his entire understanding of power, proving that a single act of hidden mercy was far more unbreachable than any concrete vault. The gray, cold light of morning finally began to creep through the narrow security grates at the top of the subterranean corridor, signaling that the night was over. Inside the vault, the artificial glow of the primary terminal screen remained the dominant light source, casting long, geometric shadows across the concrete walls. Hours had passed in absolute focus. Marco Russo sat on the edge of the desk, his tailored black suit jacket feeling slightly stiff after the long vigil, his luxury gold watch ticking steadily toward the fateful afternoon deadline. Suddenly, the sharp, rhythmic vibration of his encrypted satellite phone shattered the quiet hum of the servers. Marco didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the caller ID, his jaw tightening as the name Silvio blinked in cold white letters. He flicked his eyes down to Frank, who instantly understood the silent cue. The little boy gathered his dark brown backpack, slipped quickly out of the oversized executive chair, and slid beneath the massive mahogany desk, curling himself into the shadows where the thick bundles of data cables lived. Marco pressed the receive button, lifting the sleek device to his ear. When he spoke, his voice was a masterpiece of deceptive calm, completely stripped of the raw panic that had gripped him hours earlier. "Silvio," Marco said, his tone carrying the casual warmth of a man who believed he was talking to his most loyal brother. "You are up early. I thought you were still preparing the final security briefs for the Grand Council meeting this afternoon." On the other end of the line, Silvio Valli's voice came through with absolute normalcy, smooth and entirely relaxed. "Good morning, boss," Silvio replied, his chuckle sounding genuinely friendly. "You know me. I never sleep well before a major summit. I wanted to check in and make sure everything is running perfectly on your end. The elders are already arriving." Marco maintained his posture of absolute ease, even as his dark neck tattoos tensed under his crisp white collar. "Everything is completely locked down here, Silvio. The compound is secure, and the treasury logs are ready for the review," Marco answered with ice-cold precision, hiding the furious fire burning in his chest. Silvio paused for a fraction of a second on the line, a tiny silence that would have been invisible to anyone else, but sounded like an alarm to Marco. "Glad to hear it, boss," Silvio said, his voice dropping into a casual, offhand register. "By the way, our automated network diagnostic flag pulled up a minor synchronization error on the vault's primary maintenance logs around 3 this morning. Probably just a routine glitch, but I wanted to see if you had noticed any system lag down there, or if the terminal required a manual override reset before the council sits." Directly beneath Marco's feet, young Frank sat perfectly still in the deep shadows, the blue fabric of his pullover hoodie hidden. His small fingers flew across the compact mechanical keyboard with incredible speed, clicking quietly under the heavy desk. Frank was actively tracking Silvio's digital probe, modifying the vault's internal telemetry records in real time to feed completely fake, normal data back to the underboss's remote computer. Above him, Marco watched the malicious lines of code shift seamlessly on the primary terminal screen. "No lag at all, Silvio," Marco responded, his voice remaining completely steady. "The maintenance records are perfectly clean. I will see you at the afternoon meeting." Silvio said goodbye and hung up. Marco set the sleek phone down as Frank peered out with a confident, knowing smile. Marco set the satellite phone back on the mahogany desk, his mind already spinning forward to the next inevitable move on the grand chessboard. Silvio was suspicious. The brief pause on the line had proven that the underboss was hunting for any anomaly in the fortress. If Silvio realized his digital virus was being compromised, his immediate response would not be a physical attack on the vault, but a search for brutal leverage. Marco looked down at Frank, who was crawling out from beneath the heavy desk, his royal blue pullover hoodie slightly dusty, but his eyes completely bright with intelligence. "Your mother," Marco said, his voice dropping into a low register of deep concern. "Sarah, she is still working in the ground floor logistics wing, isn't she?" Frank nodded quickly, his messy auburn hair bouncing as his playful smile vanished. Marco knew that if Silvio felt the trap slipping away, he would instantly weaponize the innocent woman, turning her into a helpless hostage before the afternoon summit. With ice-cold determination, Marco reached for a secondary, hardwired communicator that bypassed the main digital network entirely. He dialed a private frequency, calling Victor, his most fiercely loyal elite enforcer. Victor was a quiet mountain of a man who had protected Marco's father before him, an absolute shadow who operated entirely outside of Silvio's web of influence. "Victor, listen to me carefully," Marco murmured into the receiver, his sharp features casting dark shadows under the terminal light. "I need you to initiate an extraction protocol in the ground floor logistics facility. Sarah Wilson is managing the estate's supply manifests near the delivery bays. You must move her immediately to the fortified safe room in the north sector. Do it quietly, with zero noise, and ensure no one sees you." On the other end, the giant enforcer gave a single low grunt of understanding, asking no questions before hanging up. Above them, on the primary vault monitors, the internal security grid displayed the sprawling logistics wing, a bustling maze of crates, conveyor belts, and paperwork. Frank immediately climbed back into the executive leather chair, his small fingers tapping rapidly on the mechanical keys. Using his father's biological override, Frank accessed the estate's camera routing network, deftly looping the live feeds for the ground floor hallways. To anyone monitoring the security office upstairs, the cameras would display a perfectly normal, empty corridor, completely hiding Victor's silent approach. Marco watched the screen as the massive enforcer slipped into the logistics office like a silent ghost, his dark suit blending perfectly into the background shadows of the busy room. Through the lens, Marco saw Sarah look up from her computer terminal, her face pale with immediate worry as the imposing enforcer stepped inside her small workspace. Victor leaned down, whispering a few calm, deeply reassuring words into her anxious ear, and showing her a small token from Leo's old desk to prove he was sent by Marco. The terror in Sarah's eyes instantly melted into relief when Victor subtly pointed upward, letting her know that young Frank was completely safe. Without a second thought, she quickly gathered her dark wool sweater and followed Victor out the back exit, vanishing down the dead zone stairwell that led straight toward the concrete panic bunker. Marco let out a long, slow, controlled breath, adjusting his tailored black jacket as his gold watch marked another minute saved. The final piece of his defensive shield was now firmly in place, ensuring that Silvio's deadliest hostage play was officially broken before it could even begin to take shape. The countdown timer on the terminal screen had shifted, its crimson digits indicating 20 minutes left until the fatal 3 o'clock Grand Council meeting. The subterranean vault felt small, the heavy silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of the mechanical keyboard. Marco Russo stood rigidly beside the leather chair, his hand resting near his discarded semi-automatic pistol. His sharp facial features focused on the flowing lines of code. Drops of sweat had dried along his intricate neck tattoos, leaving a cold, tight sensation beneath his unbuttoned white collar. He checked his luxury gold watch, watching the second hand sweep forward. The stakes were painfully real. Everything his family had built over 4 generations hung entirely on the fragile shoulders of the 7-year-old child sitting before him. Frank Wilson did not look up from the interface, his fair-skinned face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor. His thick, curly auburn hair fell forward over his brow as his small fingers danced across the keys with an incredible instinctive speed. A soft, satisfied smile touched the boy's lips as he struck the final enter key with a decisive tap. The chaotic rows of binary data instantly froze, consolidating into a glowing golden block at the center of the security directory. "It's finished, Mr. Marco," Frank whispered, his young voice cutting through the hum of the cooling servers with absolute calm. "The counter code is fully integrated into the mainframe architecture." Marco leaned forward, his dark eyebrows furrowing tightly as he studied the intricate interface. "Did you completely erase the logic bomb?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a mixture of intense hope and survival instinct. "If Silvio notices his virus has vanished from the server grid before the council sits, he will know his trap has been compromised." Frank shook his head gently, the vibrant royal blue pullover hoodie shifting as he adjusted the straps of his dark brown backpack. "No, deleting the virus would be way too dangerous," Frank explained, his steady brown eyes shining with technological clarity. "If I deleted it, his remote terminal would immediately throw a critical synchronization error and alert him. Instead, I did something much better. I built a digital escrow trap directly inside the financial routing core." The young boy pointed a small finger at a new series of complex, inverted data pipelines flashing brightly on the monitor. "Silvio's original code was designed to automatically drain your untraceable treasury and drop the blame on you," Frank continued, his smile turning slightly mischievous. "I left his logic bomb completely active, so he thinks his plan is working perfectly. But the exact microsecond the clock strikes 3, my script will secretly intercept the transaction and alter the destination routing parameters. Instead of flowing out to his anonymous offshore bank accounts, the stolen funds will be locked securely inside a hidden, unbreachable escrow loop that I created." Marco watched the screen, awe washing over his sharp features. "And the evidence?" "To authorize a transfer that massive, the network has to force a connection back to the origin device. When his virus triggers, my escrow trap will snap shut and automatically pull Silvio's encrypted digital signatures, personal device IDs, and private cryptographic routing keys straight into the visible ledger. He isn't just going to fail to steal your fortune, Mr. Marco. His own virus is going to drag his identity out into the light for the entire Grand Council to see." Marco straightened to his full height, a fierce, cold smile finally breaking across his tanned face as he realized the hunter had officially become the prey. The grand conference hall of the Russo estate was built out of polished mahogany and dark shadows. At the center sat a massive oak table where the 9 elders of the global syndicate sat in absolute silence. These stone-faced leaders had spent their lives commanding empires, their sharp eyes tracking every movement in the room. Marco Russo sat at the head of the long table, his face a calm mask, his crisp white dress shirt neatly buttoned to his collar to obscure the dark neck tattoos underneath. His luxury gold watch glinted under the heavy crystal chandelier as the metallic hands moved forward. Standing directly behind his chair was Victor, a silent mountain of a man who remained perfectly still, a symbol of unyielding loyalty. In the corner of the room, a giant wall screen remained dark, waiting for the presentation to begin. The tension in the air felt like a physical weight. On the opposite side of the table, underboss Silvio Valli adjusted his tailored jacket, a smooth, relaxed smile resting on his lips. He looked like a man who believed he had already won. At exactly 3 p.m., the heavy brass clock on the mantel chimed 3 times, the deep tones echoing through the silent hall. The moment the final chime died, Silvio's relaxed expression vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and rehearsed tragedy. He stood up slowly, drawing the attention of every elder in the room. He slammed his palms flat against the polished table, feigning a perfect performance of utter devastation and righteous anger. "Elders of the council," Silvio began, his voice trembling with a dramatic outrage that sounded entirely genuine. "I am deeply broken to bring you this terrible news today." The captains leaned forward, their faces tightening as Silvio continued his speech. "For weeks, I noticed strange discrepancies within our financial network," Silvio lied smoothly, pointing a dramatic finger across the table toward Marco. "I refuse to believe that the man we trusted to lead us would ever betray our sacred oath. But the digital records do not lie. I am forced to show you the ultimate proof of an unforgivable treason." Silvio reached into his pocket and produced a secure remote device, his fingers tapping the interface to trigger his hidden logic bomb. He looked directly at Marco, a cruel, victorious spark flashing deep within his eyes. "Behold the truth!" Silvio shouted, waving his hand toward the long wall. "Our leader has betrayed us all. Look at the ledger screen and see exactly how Marco Russo has systematically drained our entire untraceable treasury for his own selfish gain." The giant wall monitor flared to life, a bright flash of light cutting through the dimness of the room. The elders gasped, their rigid postures shattering as complex columns of financial routing data began to scroll rapidly across the glass interface. Silvio stood tall, his chin lifted in complete triumph as he waited for the automated electronic breadcrumbs to permanently seal Marco's fate in front of the global council. He was completely certain that his untraceable virus had executed perfectly and that the fabricated evidence would point straight to the boss. He did not know that 3 floors below, a little boy in a royal blue hoodie was smiling. Silvio folded his arms across his chest, completely unaware that the golden data blocks pulsing on the screen were not the ones he had written. The trap had officially sprung, and the entire room held its breath as the system prepared to display the final identity of the thief. The primary terminal screens suddenly flashed a vibrant emerald green, instantly fracturing the tense silence of the grand conference hall. Silvio's triumphant smile vanished from his face as his own legal name, device identification numbers, and encrypted routing keys appeared across the interface in bold lettering. The columns of complex data completely rearranged themselves in real time, exposing Silvio's secret offshore bank accounts and tracing the malicious logic bomb straight back to his personal cellular device. The syndicate elders murmured in deep shock, staring at the screen, as the truth collapsed Silvio's elaborate plan. Before the trembling underboss could utter a single word of defense or construct a clever lie, a crystal-clear, decrypted audio recording filled every corner of the room. It was Silvio's own voice, cold and ruthless, delivering the precise execution order to an assassin to eliminate Leo Wilson and mask the murder as a medical accident. The syndicate elders rose from their chairs in collective fury, their hands immediately reaching for their weapons. Silvio panicked, making a desperate move toward his jacket pocket, but Victor closed the distance with terrifying speed. The massive enforcer slammed Silvio flat against the table, disarming him instantly and dragging his struggling body out through the side doors to face the permanent discipline of the house. With the leafy threat finally neutralized, Marco looked at the empty seat across the table and fully realized his long life in the criminal shadows was over. He chose to break the multi-generational cycle of violence, stepping down from his executive position and permanently locking the subterranean concrete vault forever. He used his vast wealth to relocate Frank and Sarah to a peaceful, sunlit countryside estate, far away from the dangerous surveillance grids and concrete fortresses of his past. 3 months later, on a beautiful Sunday morning, Marco pulled his car up the gravel driveway to visit them. Frank ran out onto the front step, laughing happily while still wearing his favorite royal blue pullover hoodie. With a bright grin, the little boy proudly handed Marco his dark brown backpack as a special gift. Inside, Marco found a hand-drawn blueprint of the old vault. Frank had completely hollowed out the cold concrete walls on the paper, filling the entire dark room with bright drawings of green trees, soaring birds, and radiant yellow sunlight. Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, holding a fresh tray of warm cookies, her face glowing with a peace she hadn't known in years. Marco sat with them at the table, sharing stories and sweet laughter, feeling the cold barriers around his heart finally melt away completely. Looking at the beautiful drawing, the former boss adjusted his luxury watch, smiled warmly, and finally understood what it truly meant to be safe. Dear friends, the story of Marco and young Frank is a powerful reminder that the strongest fortresses we build are never made of steel, concrete, or biometric codes. True security belongs to the quiet debts of kindness we pay in secret. It reminds us that when we protect the vulnerable, we are often planting the very seeds that will grow to shield us in our darkest hours. Power can build walls to keep the world out, but only loyalty and an open heart can build a space where we are truly safe. True wealth is not what we lock away in the dark, but the light we allow into our lives through the eyes of those who love us without fear. Thank you for watching, and may your home always be a sanctuary of trust.